Lately, we've been talking about the Southern Baptist Convention, or SBC's, annual meeting, which wrapped up about a week ago. Their theme was Walk Worthy. By that phrase, they mean that SBC members should be easily identified in the wild by just how wonderfully they treat each other and the people around them. Of course, SBC leaders pushed this entire idea because they think it'll turn the tide on their decline. It won't. And today, we will explore why. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today is June 26th, 2026. This is Roll to Disbelieve, and I'm Captain Cassidy. Thank you for joining me. Today was fun because I got to prowl around some very old books for a while. It is just magical to see so many old books available online these days. It was unthinkable 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Man, I still have one of my mom's old CDs. It had a whole bunch of very old books saved on it in text form. She got it for like $10 somewhere. And that is how I got my hands on Jude the Obscure. She probably got that in the 90s. For a long time, late 90s, very early aughts, in the early internet, we would go to Project Gutenberg to get those really old books. I saved a bunch of those too. And now, Wayback's got them, Google Books has them. Gosh, there's all kinds of digital libraries. A lot about today's internet is still very ephemeral, but I am hoping that we will keep archiving the records of our past and keep them available for future generations. This is a really amazing time to be alive, for sure. Definitely makes it a lot easier to trace changes in Christianity, which is what I was doing today. Before we get going on that project, I would like to thank my patrons and supporters. You make Roll to Disbelieve possible. I appreciate your support so much. Thank you. And if you would like to join them, I would love to have your support as well. I have options at the end of today's write-up. It'll be either on Patreon, under Roll to Disbelieve, one word, or over at our official website, rolltodisbelieve.com. I appreciate whatever you decide to do. And now, our situation report. Walk worthy, O Southern Baptists, walk worthy. As I mentioned at the 2026 SBC Annual Meeting, the theme was Walk Worthy. The phrase comes from Ephesians 4, 1-3, in which Paul tells his followers to, quote, walk in a manner worthy of the calling you have received, unquote. The King James Version actually just says walk worthy, so that's where they get the combined words from. Clint Presley, who is the departing SBC president, they've got a new one now, set this theme and gave the keynote address on it. I have a link to the video of all those first day presentations in the post, and if you want to check it out, it begins about 3 hours and 41 minutes into the video. Yeah, it's like 4.5 hours long. Presley had a lot to say about what he thought walking worthy should entail. From his address, quote, from the day I became a Southern Baptist, I never wanted to be anything but a Southern Baptist. Who are they? A gospel-loving, mission-minded, free people that exist for the Great Commission. We'll get into that in a second. And our mission is so vital that we've got to do all we can in big ways and small ways to walk worthy of the calling with which we have been called, unquote. Okay, so to Presley, walking worthy means evangelicals conducting themselves in a way that makes the Great Commission more effective. The Great Commission, in turn, is the order that evangelicals think Jesus gave them to go convert the entire world. This order appears at the tail end of the Gospel of Mark, verses 9-20. And I gotta say, if Jesus really wants Christians to go recruit everyone on earth, SBC leaders should be feeling pretty nervous about their next performance evaluation with the boss. SBC metrics look absolutely dismal, and they have for years. For a long time now, they've been losing followers every year. It's been almost 20 solid years. Their baptism ratios, they're slowly rebounding from the devastating 2020 pandemic year. But the membership, that tells the real story. It keeps dropping. And churches keep dropping out of the denomination. Most of those are closing from lack of funds or interest. But others are dropping out because they disagree with the SBC's fixation on literalism and inerrancy. And in addition to all of that, the SBC has a huge sex abuse crisis, which their leaders are unwilling to do a single thing about. And that crisis has been in the news since 2019. Yeah, it's now been 7 years. Do you know where your SBC sex abuse reform is? Not in the SBC, that's for sure. To examine the theme of walk worthy, let's start with what it means in Christianese. In Christianese, walk worthy means conducting oneself as a proper Christian. As Presley points out in his address, Ephesians chapters 1 through 3 mostly relate to theological concepts, like conversion being the start of a changed, altogether better life. But then chapter 4 comes in, and it launches into the kind of behavior that Paul expects out of his followers after they have begun those new lives. Interestingly, I don't see anything in the chapter relating to the Great Commission directly. I don't think Paul would even have known about it. Most scholars agree that the Great Commission was a much later addition to Mark. There's not a single gospel fragment before about the 5th century that contains it, so it probably popped up in the 400s. So instead of pushing for the Great Commission style evangelism, Paul is describing the ideal Christian as someone who treats other Christians well, doesn't steal or gossip, doesn't act in anger, doesn't lie or cheat, doesn't indulge in vices. He wanted his followers to be marked by their kindness to each other. So it is very interesting to me that Presley's relating walking worthy so strongly to evangelism. Paul clearly thought that the infilling of Yahweh's Spirit should produce very big changes in believers' lives. But he doesn't specifically tell Christians to stop acting like assholes just to score more evangelism sales. The phrase walk worthy seems to have been interpreted as admonitions to behave, because good behavior should be an outgrowth of faith, not part of an overall evangelism strategy. A sermon that I found from 1704, yeah, see, archives, it sure sounds that way. A sermon I found from 1846, this one was preached in front of Queen Anne, that also relates walking worthy to good behavior. Until recent decades, walking worthy was a behavioral guide for general purposes, how people should behave in churches and toward other Christians, not an evangelism strategy. And it is just so interesting to me that walking worthy seems to have completely replaced a much older Christianese concept called a good witness. I was Pentecostal from the mid-1980s to about the early 1990s. I was out by around 1994. I had many evangelical friends in college as well. And, we talked all the time about strategies for making our evangelism more effective. Not once, not ever, did I ever hear the phrase walk worthy as any part of those evangelism strategy sessions. Instead, we laser focused on what we called our witness. This was a very important word. It described our overall credibility as evangelists. So, maintaining a good witness was of utmost importance. Being a bad witness would hinder evangelism. No one trusted an evangelist who was an obvious hypocrite. If even we could not live according to our own rules, then how did we expect anyone else to do it? How could we expect anyone to look at us as new creations in Christ if our lives looked exactly like the pre-conversion state? It was a problem. For people who weren't in the crowd at the time, it might be hard to understand how important this idea was to have a good witness. God, the worst thing you could say to someone back then was that they were a bad witness. We had to behave better than those heathens. We couldn't allow ourselves to be seen as hypocrites. It was an unthinkable blow to our credibility. Certainly today's evangelicals don't seem to care at all about their witness. They don't even use the word anymore. It's been years since I heard it. They call hate love and evil good, and they mock us for daring to suggest that they pretend to care about their own rules. Their behavior online, in particular, reveals just how little their faith has changed them. My first pastor would have skinned me alive if he had caught me treating anyone the way today's evangelicals, as a group, treat people. Of course, at the very time I attended that church, that same pastor was allegedly helping to cover up a huge sex abuse scandal in a sister church's youth ministry. I don't see hiding sex abuse of minors in Paul's list of ideals in Ephesians 4, but I don't know the original Greek and Hebrew, so who am I to say? Now Walking Worthy has replaced that old school witness as a figure of credibility. More importantly, though, now evangelicals directly relate it to doctrinal correctness, not behavior. Now evangelicals' behavior will be correct, not because their God Spirit changed them, but because they believe exactly the right doctrines. To someone with my background, that is a stunning, breathtaking shift. It is wild. As a potent illustration of that shift, Clint Presley laments the absolute state of his denomination in the speech. He said, quote, "One of the downsides of being the president of the Southern Baptist Convention is you actually get to experience some of the Southern Baptist Convention at its worst. You can't believe some of the things I've received." Unquote. Oh, I think we could. I think we really, really could. Naturally, though, the solution to those worst things is being, quote, vigilant about our doctrine, unquote. And that matters, Presley says, because, quote, Christian living actually follows Christian doctrine, unquote. So, once Southern Baptists become vigilant enough about their doctrines, those worst things will become much more rare. And I gotta ask, really? Are you sure? Because the architect of the SBC's last schism, Paul Pressler, believed exactly the correct doctrines. It would be harder to find someone they admire more for having correct doctrines. His version of the SBC's doctrines came to dominate the denomination. It would be hard to locate a more doctrinally correct Southern Baptist. And yet, for decades, he allegedly molested, assaulted, and harassed countless young men. His equally correct partner in schemes, Paige Patterson, lost his SBC seminary job because of his mishandling of a student's rape. But don't worry about him. After he lost that job, he almost immediately got rehired at another seminary, not SBC branded, but still evangelical. He even taught an ethics class there alongside another disgraced hypocrite SBC leader, Richard Land, who lost his job because he plagiarized and was really, really racist. Evangelicals have a lot of trouble accepting that their most beloved leaders can hide some serious skeletons in their closets, that someone can believe exactly, totally the right things, and yet prey on and deceive others for decades. There's a reason for that, and that reason forms one of the biggest fault lines in their entire worldview. I call it the zeroth error of evangelicalism, as the night the day. For years now, we've been tracking evangelicals' fixation on correct doctrines leading to correct behavior. The trope name, as the night the day, comes from Hamlet, of course, Polonius's speech to Laertes, quote, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man," unquote. In a stream of advice to his son, Polonius describes honesty toward others as an inevitable outgrowth of honesty within oneself. In that view, it should be impossible for someone to be false to any man while their behavior authentically and consistently reflects their ideals. Evangelicals have their own version of that. They think if they embrace all the correct doctrines, and believe very firmly in the correctness of those doctrines, then correct behavior will flow out of those beliefs. I noticed this mindset almost exactly 10 years ago. Seriously, it's been 10 years. I was reviewing Preston Sprinkle's book, People to be Loved. It was about how evangelicals should totally be bigots for Jesus against gay people. Preston Sprinkle seriously thought that if he could figure out exactly what the Bible says about same-sex romantic relationships, then his behavior toward them would, of necessity, become loving and gracious. So he thought Christians were shamefully abusing and mistreating LGBT people because they didn't understand what the Bible said about the subject. So he was here to do a Bible study and set everybody straight. So to speak. Once I noticed this weird link between correct beliefs and rule-following behavior, I couldn't unsee it. I noticed it again in The Scandal of the Evangelical Conscience, wherein the author, Ronald Sider, claimed that hypocrisy came from, quote, a one-sided, unbiblical, reductionist understanding of the gospel and salvation, unquote. And I noticed it again when studying the conservative resurgence, that earlier SBC schism. It won largely because its proponents falsely asserted that adopting literalism and inerrancy would lead to huge growth and evangelism success. And again, I saw it in Christian parenting guides. They asserted that studying and embracing the correct beliefs would lead to far more obedience to the group's rules, and in turn led to better youth retention. And for that matter, I believed it too when I was Pentecostal. I almost joined a cult because of it. I was looking and looking for perfect Christian groups, the groups that believed all the perfect things, the original things, the first-century Christian things. I thought people that held imperfect beliefs, that was why people got mistreated. A group that practiced original Christianity and held perfect beliefs could never mistreat its members. Oh, I was shocked when I found out that the leader of that one cult was beating members half to death during all-night struggle sessions. He almost killed one of those guys. Over and over again, evangelicals hammer at this idea that someone holding perfect beliefs can't possibly break the group's rules. But over and over again, real life shows us the opposite. And it doesn't even work. Perfect beliefs did not lead to huge evangelism gains for the SBC after that schism completed around 2000. Actually, the denomination began faltering right around then. Their high point occurred around 2006. The serious decline began a few years after that. Around the same time, the very first referendum on the schism, a 1,000,000 baptism challenge, failed catastrophically. They not only did not get 1,000,000 baptisms, they got fewer than they'd gotten the year before. And their fail train hasn't even come to a slowdown yet, much less a stop. Perfect beliefs haven't led to any great increases in rule following either. Instead, we keep seeing the loudest voices for doctrinal extremism get hit by scandal after scandal. Not a single one of these extremists acts anything like Jesus describes in the Sermon on the Mount, much less as Paul describes in Ephesians 4. So if any heathens encounter a Christian who is genuinely kind, meek, humble, loving, serving, gracious, generous, self-denying, peaceful, all that, we are hugely unlikely to link that behavior to their religious beliefs. Simply put, we've met way too many terrible, hypocritical Christians to imagine that their beliefs have any kind of impact on behavior. Instead, as an old friend of mine found out the hard way, heathens might think that someone behaving super nice to them is a vegetarian. And here's the funniest thing about Christians having a consistent, reliably good witness about truly walking worthy. A consistently good witness would definitely be a mark in favor of Christianity's validity as a faith system. I mean, it wouldn't mean their supernatural claims were true. No, of course not. But it would be hard to ignore the simple fact that somehow Christians were much better people than those from other ideologies or religions. especially given how piss poor their roadmap to self-betterment really is, how impossible it is to use it to get from start point conversion to end point decent human being. We wouldn't understand it at all. It would be surreal. We would have a lot of trouble explaining the data points that their behavior would necessarily spawn. Unfortunately, that is not the world that they, or we, inhabit. In the real world, we know Christians far better for how poorly they live up to their own ideals than for their obedience to them. Worse, the louder and more fervent any given Christians behave, the worse and more serious their hypocrisy tends to be. And worst of all, the more powerful any given Christians are, the less accountable they are for their own hypocrisy. And there is nothing Christian leaders can do about it either. There's no way to compel the flocks to behave at all times. No way to punish them if they step out of bounds. No way to make them pretend to care about evangelism success, or even about personal evangelism in the first place. But there is one upside of going with walk-worthy as this year's annual meeting theme. Nobody has any real way to evaluate whether it succeeds or fails. Next up, how to become a better listener in a form of Christianity that cannot allow truly deep communication. It's an interesting problem for them, and we will explore it next time. Until then, this is Captain Cassidy signing off. Hope y'all have a marvelous weekend, and we'll see you soon.